as I was saying, there's one siege and these incidents after the other, and I can't do everyone, but what we're going to show in about a minute is a scene from that dramatization, which has to do with the siege of Zbaraj, but actually is identical with what I'm going to be talking about at the very beginning, which is the siege and the attack on Tolchin, where there was you're going to see extreme violence in terms of the siege warfare at that time. You can imagine what it was like to be Jewish or Polish or whatever in those eras. And the only difference is, and I'll take this time that we have to make the point, the only difference is that in Tolchin and in a number of other places, you'll be surprised to learn that the majority of the soldiers were Jews. You understand? They don't want to show this in the Polish TV, and it wasn't true everywhere. But in a number of places it was, and that really it raises a very fascinating kind of historiographical question. We don't know, there's stuff out there we don't know anything about, and that is where they get all these Jews with 22s, as I say. There must have been a whole class of Jews, but really was, whole class of Jews, thousands of them, who lived in the Ukraine, were tough guys, because otherwise they wouldn't move there. They wouldn't get involved in that kind of a business. Running a whole vast area of peasants who hate you or whatever. You have to be able to take a sock in the jaw and give it back, or know your way around a knife fight, or things of this nature. And on the other hand, there were also Jewish Jews, the usual cowards that raise your hand if you're in category A or B. You can put them all down. The fact is that we don't know much about these people. Do you understand what I'm saying? These are people, every Jewish community had a wide range of individuals, always had. It's like the Lulav and Esrog metaphor that you find in Chazal. Some of the Lulav, some of the Esrog, some of the Das, and some of the Rose. And the only thing is, there weren't different types of Judaism at that time. So there's one type of Judaism, some were more on the right, more on the left, but it's not an ideological matter. It had to do entirely with what you practice. And you had people, as we do today, who not necessarily the number one learners or other, but if you're in trouble, you call on them. You may recall all the fighting that we're talking about takes place here, where I'm pointing at the moment, which is the southeastern part of Poland, or what you and I call today the Ukraine. Ukraine actually means the border territory. That was the new area, and that's where all these communities that we're discussing are located. Nemirov, Tolchin, and all these other places. Bar and Constantine are right over there where I'm pointing at. Many people here, I don't doubt, if you go back to your great-great-grandparents or whatever, probably come from that part of the woods, and it was the wrong place to be in 1648 and 1649. That we know from hindsight. Last time we saw that, you can go right into the battle. I'll speak, you can watch both. What's that? Great, okay, that's excellent. We have a quality technical staff. That's an understatement. Well, it's true. Now, and we should all appreciate it, but let's get right into it. The point is that, as you see over here, there's the Poles on the one side who are the besieged, and as I say before, the only difference is if you were there, you'd see a lot more Jews, because in Tolchin, there were 600 Polish knights and their retainers, and 2,100 Jews. So 2/3 or more of these are the Cossacks attacking, a bunch of Vildachayas, and as you'll see, and the Poles are preparing for the siege, and there's the Polish commander and all that, and that's exactly, as he says over here, that I can read you just for a second over there. V'chizka mifsar ma'od ma'od, that the Jews and the Poles strengthened the fortifications. V'chamushim al b'nei Yisrael klei zayin, and the Jews went up well armed with all kinds of weapons. V'yamdu al hachoma asar b'Yehudim, and they stood on the walls, the Polish officers and the Jews. V'chol pam shekarvu lagesh avonim al mizsar, exactly as you see over here, every time the Cossacks attempted to storm the place. V'yoru hamorim ha'umdim al hachoma b'chitzim v'b'knei sreifa. Exactly what you see over there, that they fired down with cannon and with rifles and with all kinds of swords and bows and arrows. And they had to flee. Now, notice he says over here, I repeat, what you're seeing over here is they only show you the Poles. The guys at the top in Tolchin and many other places were Jews. Not all of them, of course, but many were. So they're fighting like crazy. B'nai Yisrael azru chayil, and the Jews fought very bravely. And sometimes pursued them. And if you wait here, you'll see in a minute there will be a counter charge of the cavalry of the garrison, which in this particular page they show the Polish cavalry charging, but in reality, it's hard to imagine a Jewish cavalry or something like that charging. That's Prince Jeremy. And the point is that this was going on. Vayakim Kama Meisish, and they killed hundreds of the Cossacks. So this was going on for days, and they weren't winning. And that means that they're too tough, and then they got real sneaky. And what the Cossacks did was they appealed secretly to the Polish officers in the fortress, and they say, I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'll tell you out loud, and they say, you hand over the Jewish weapons to us, and we'll go away. And what does that mean? This is already a little bit like Eichmann. You're using circumlocutions. You say you hand over their weapons. They don't say hand over to people, but everybody knows where it's going to happen. And the Poles say to the Jews, now I repeat, the Jews are 2/3 of the garrison or more. And the Poles say to the Jews, give us your weapons. We want to hand it over to them. The Sarim, the princes, the Poles, collected all their weapons. Can you imagine this? And they understood what's going on, the Jews. And the Jews said like this, son of a gun, let's take the Poles down with us. These guys are stabbing us in the back, literally. Don't let them get away with it. You understand? In other words, maybe we can't fight the Cossacks, maybe we should don't let them, that we should suffer from the treachery. They had sworn on the Bibles that they wouldn't do this and they would stick with the Jews. There would be the Jewish cavalry, as I said before. There's Khmelnytsky trying to fight against them. Look how violent it was at that time. This happened all through 1648 and 1649 and afterwards. As I say before, it was a terrible time to live in one way or the other. Now, here's the tragedy that happens in Tolchin, or rather the most remarkable of stories. So the Jews say, we're not going to give up our 22s, we're going to take our weapons, and we're going to take down the Poles, and at least go down fighting, like at the Alamo. But the leading rabbi, the Rosh Hashiva, remember we spoke 2 weeks ago about the importance of the figure of a Rosh Hashiva in the Polish community. And he says to them, can't do it. We have to give the weapons up. Why? We have to think of wider, this is a remarkable story, I know no parallel of this. We have to think of the wider repercussions for Klal Yisrael. Anachnu b'golus bein ha'amim. He gives a speech and he says, we're in Golus here in Poland. Im tishlechu yad basarim. If we attack the Poles, the princes, V'shamu malchi Edom, and the others hear about it, nikmasim malchin b'nei Yisrael b'gola chalila. Then other Jews will be attacked by the Poles throughout Poland. You understand? We'll be totally defenseless. Maybe here we'll win temporarily for a minute, but this will unleash a huge wave of anti-Semitism among the Poles, who, after all, were always anti-Semitic anyway. They were just friends with the Jews for reasons of economics and other things. So if we do what we feel like doing, then it'll have the worst repercussions. So we'll surrender. And if it's God's will, then we're no better than anyone else. We may go down and be martyrs like happened 2 days ago or a week ago in Nemirov. Maybe God will give us mercy in front of the enemies. Maybe they'll take money instead. And they did listen. So it's as I say before, it's a remarkable story where one Jewish community pretty much knew what they're getting into. And they did it really for patriotic reasons, even though we're talking about a period when there was no Jewish country. They were think about what I'm saying over here. They knew, you can see over here, they knew who they're dealing with, on both sides, by the way. And they say we have a Klal Yisrael responsibility in the most tragic sense. And what they did is they brought all their weapons, they put it in the courtyard. Naturally, the Poles give it to the Cossacks, and Cossacks then say, we'll talk to you in 3 days. And 3 days later, after everybody's been starving a little bit, then they say, give us the Jews. And then we'll leave you alone. And the Poles push them out. And the Jews they're in trouble. But they were already hungry. They said, we want all the Jews. They immediately physically pushed them out of the fortress, out of the citadel. The Poles figured they wouldn't get burned as the Jews will. And the Jews walked out completely mentally shattered, with broken spirit. And the Cossacks say, all the Jews here, and they bring them into one big closed garden, like an enclosed area, so he shouldn't escape. Mamu at bush, and they made him wait a long time, and we all know what they have in mind. And there were three big rabbis there, and they were making speeches to get ready for a martyrdom, Kiddush Hashem, and do not give up your faith. Now, I want to emphasize, as I did last time, there's a profoundly religious component to all this. By that I mean, if a Jew was willing to convert, they wouldn't kill him. So all the people that were told to get killed, except, in a rare moment of spontaneous violence, the Jews who get killed, the men and the women, or things like that, they chose to. You understand? Most of the time, if they wished to, they could survive. And here comes a classic case. And they said, get ready. No one should give up on their religion, and if necessary, we'll all die a martyr's death. And they all said, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and Shem Shalibchem Echad and Libein Echad. Our heart is all one in this matter. And then a Cossack representative came in, and he noat stega v'karka. He put a black flag on the ground, stuck it in the ground, and he said like this: whoever wants to live, meaning whoever wants to convert, come on to this side. It's like the Alamo in reverse. Right? This is where anyone who will convert will live. Anybody who's not, we're not responsible for it. For lo anu shum adam, and nobody said anything. Notice no one did. For machri shalosh pamim, 3 times they gave him the offer. Miyad pasach hasharagan, when nobody did, then they opened the gates and in stormed v'nichnesu kulam b'chor yaf, and in stormed the Cossacks in rage and heragarav, and they killed 1,500 people. B'chol mises meshunas ba'olam kanal, the same kind of things we talked about last week, all kind of horrible forms of death, and the rabbis and all the rest of it. And the 3 biggest rabbis they didn't kill because they figured get money for them, for a lot of money. Acharigas Yehudim. Now, after all this, and they just chopped everybody in half. Let me just make one remark over here. Historians will recall, this is sad stuff, but we're in the 3 weeks. It's 9 days right now anyway. There are famous historical articles and essays which discuss the following interesting, sad fact. And that is, what's the difference between 1096 and 1648? That's usually how it's spelled out. We are soon going to have the kinos. And some people here, we have men, women, some people come to the kinos and some don't. I'm talking about during the daytime. In the Crusades, you had roughly analogous situations. Not exactly this way, but there were massacres. There were much, much smaller numbers. There were much, much smaller Jewish communities. Nothing like this. Poland was busting with Jewish population. The Rhineland in 1096 was much smaller. Having said that, there's the same situation where they threaten to kill them if they do not convert, and Jewish communities many times commit mass suicide. Now this is most unusual because usually most people say Judaism is opposed to suicide, which is not exactly true. We're usually opposed to suicide, but in certain cases we permit it. The best proof being what I just said. These were very frum communities. At the time of Rashi, later on in the time of the Bali Tosos, in the Kinos, those who take the trouble to read them, now you have them in English translation, they talk about the fact that we see people, the Paitan, the person writing the Kina said, what I've seen, no one has seen. Parents killing their whole families and killing themselves. And there's a whole graphic, you think what I told you was graphic, and of course it was last week, but it's nothing compared to the scenes of human tragedy when you contemplate the notion of suicide and people killing their own families. None of that happened in Poland, by contrast. Instead, what happened was that the Jews did not go with the option of converting, and therefore they let themselves be killed, as I just described over here in Tolchin. And this happened repeatedly, you understand? We don't have any cases of Jews taking their own life, because by the time you get to the Ashkenazi Jews in Poland, it's like some of you looked at me when I said Jews don't do suicide. Right? If someone else, wants to do what they do, that's one thing, but Jews never commit suicide, like we saw in the Holocaust. It was extremely, extremely rare for Jews to take their own life. It happened a little bit, but it's very rare. It's not a Jewish thing. And so, what does it bespeak? Now, leaving the historiographical side, he says over here, then they went to the Poles. Poles said, hey, you promised if we give you the Jews, everything will be okay. And they say you were stupid enough to believe that. And they kill all the Poles. That was a good thing. Not a good thing simply for revenge purposes, but they tortured them. Hadukas and the Duke, who gave the Jews over, Kodem Mosa Ina Gvirtu Shtei Banos Lefonov. They nailed him to the chair. They raped his wife and daughters in front of him. Then they sawed him in half. Before his servants came by, who he used to boss around, and they said, "Oh, you want it? Your Majesty, can we take care of you?" Like they used to see in the French Revolution, Russian Revolution, making fun of the aristocrats before they killed them. And as they say, then they sawed him in half. This got out, and that was the best thing for the Jews. This is what he writes over here, because they saw it's futile to hand the Jews over. You follow? What that rabbi said worked in a tragic fashion. He said, if we go and fight the Poles, then we'll really be in trouble. But on the other hand, if we do not, we will be martyred, but the other Jews will benefit. And the reason they benefited was, first of all, there never was an occasion where a Jew would do anything against Poles. Second of all, the Pole side doesn't work. It's just a trick on the part of the Cossacks to weaken the Polish side so they can, divide and conquer and finish them off. So it was good that everybody heard that they sawed this guy in half and they raped his children and everything in front of him, because then the other Polish generals and nobles and soldiers said you cannot trust them anymore. And he says it over here. They sawed his head off with a saw, and everybody saw that this was min hashamayim. Notice even the non-Jews saw. See, these people broke a solemn oath, and then they suffered a horrible death. That's God saying, Christian God. That's God saying, don't do that. That was a good thing for the Jews. And all the other princes said that this guy got what was coming to him because they violated their oath. Now here's the interesting thing. They ran into that place and killed everybody right and left. Well, it wasn't exactly like the Germans. The Germans went in afterwards, even days later, and looked around if anybody was still breathing. I don't know if you know that. Right? They went that far. These guys didn't.